Hello everyone, my name is Steve and welcome back to episode 4 of Sneaky Programming. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at user input and comments. So the main thing that's been missing from our program so far is the ability for the user to adjust parts of the program. So for example, right now, a developer has to come in here and manually adjust these values or change this minus to a plus if they want to do addition, subtraction. That is not great user experience because obviously the user can't actually do that. So how do we go about fixing this? Well, to get started, let's just come up to the top here. And we're going to start off by typing console.clear. This is hopefully pretty obvious and it just does what it says it does. It clears out the console. And then we're going to say write line, and we're going to write welcome to the calculator \n. So what's this \n? Why is that a highlight and why is that in yellow? Well, this is what's called an escape character. There are a lot of escape characters. Backslash, for example, is one of them, or \t, for example, is another one. These are escape characters. Essentially, it's not actually going to print a backslash and then an N to the console. It's going to take that and it's going to say, okay, this tells me to write a new line. So it's going to make a space beneath this line. That's all that's doing. And then we're going to ask the user for some input. So we're going to say enter the first variable. So the first variable is A, of course. The second one will be B. So how do we do that? How do we take input? Well, we use the console class again, and we're going to be making use of a new variable type we learned last time called the string. String input equals console.readLine. So what this does is it's going to wait for the user to type something into the console. Once they hit enter, it's going to take anything they typed on that line and store it in the variable input. So now we have whatever they typed. Of course, we have it as a string and we want it to be a float. So how do we fix that? Well, we're going to use conversion through something called parsing. So type float.parse input. Essentially all this does is it tells the computer to read whatever's in input as a float if possible. So for example, if you typed 1.3, that's a float right there, but the computer thinks it's a string since we're storing it in a string. So we just have to tell the float to look at this and say, okay, well that's 1.3 obviously, so let's store that in A. We can bring these up to keep it organized, and then we can do the same thing for the second variable. So we're going to say console.writeLine, enter the second variable, and we don't actually have to do string input again, right? Because we've already defined that. So we can instead just overwrite it and just say input equals console.readLine. This can be a little bit confusing because it looks like we're just setting it back to what it used to be set to, which is whatever A is going to be. But that's not what's happening. We're overwriting it. We're asking for input a second time, and we're storing that in input and erasing whatever used to be there. So now we can take float B here and do the same thing we did with A, which is float.parse input. Just like that. Very, very simple. Now the final thing we need for our math function, remember, the final thing we need is going to be the type of math. So write line, and we're going to say enter the type of math to perform. Pretty simple. Again, we'll use input here. No reason to define a whole new variable every time because we don't need to. And we're going to store this as a char. Remember, we're looking for a char type. So we're going to say char type of math equals input square brackets 0. Now what are these square brackets? We've looked at normal parentheses and we've looked at curly brackets. Well, what are the square brackets? Well, square brackets are searching inside of a string. So for example, if we have a string here, actually we can just use this. We have the string enter the type of math to perform. inside this is characters, right? A string is a string of characters. So each one of these characters has a numerical value associated with it, which is called its index, the index of that character within that string. So index starts at 0 in computer programming. So a capital E here would be index 0, all right? If you want to get the n, this lowercase n, you do index 1, and so on and so forth for the whole string. So what we're saying here is get the first character in the input. Since the input will only be one character, just because it's only one of these things, it should just give us that, and that should be just fine. For math, we can leave A and B as they are, and put type of math in there. Remember, we got it up here. And then we'll just stick with console.writeLine answer. And that'll work. In fact, that should work just fine. But it's not a great user experience, and we'll talk about that in a second. For now, just run it. So you can see here, it says enter the first variable. So we're going to go ahead and put in, just so we know it works again, we're going to say 0.5. And we're going to say 0.5 again, and then we're going to say plus. And there you go. It works just fine. So let's, again, just to be clear, we're going to break down what's happening. So console.clear. We clear out anything that happens to be in the console. Console.writeLine welcome to the calculator is this, and then you can see there's a space here. Now that space is there because of this new line escape character right here. All right? And next it says enter the first variable. That's right here. Sets the enter of the first variable, right? We do that here, and we assign that to float A, and then we do the same thing, and we assign it to float B. Now we have A and B of 0.5 and 0.5. Enter the type of math to perform. We entered a plus sign. So the string input contained only a plus sign. So the first character in the string input would be a plus sign. So we can get that here on char type of math, and then we just perform math the way we did last time. Nothing down here has changed. And there you go, we stop. But if any of you have used a calculator before, you know this isn't a great program because it kicks us out of the program as soon as we finish calculating. So let's just fix that. It's very simple. In the math function, we're going to write else, and else is just the first part of this else if without the if, right? So we're saying if this, then this, right? So if not this, then we're going to run this. But wait, also this has to be true. An else, so this is false, and an if means this has to be true. This has to be false, this has to be true for an else if. An else is just the first part. It just means if this statement right here is false, then run it. And we put it right at the bottom so that it doesn't get caught up in the mixture of it. And else, we're just going to call start again. And because we have console.clear, that's just going to restart the calculator. So, how do we actually make this work and not crash? Well, we use something called environment. Environment is a class, right? It's just a class like console or like app. So it's going to be green here. Say exit 0. Now 0 or 1, that's just a simple exit code or an error code. You can just leave that at 0. You don't really need to understand how it works too well right now. And what you see now is we have implemented error handling. That's the first part of making this calculator more real. So for example, we can put in 1, we can put in 2, and then say when we're trying to add a plus here for addition, we forget to hold down the shift key. We just hit equals. We hit enter there, it's going to restart. Again, let's break this down. So we know how this part works. We got all of this. Char type of math, in this instance, held an equal sign. When it comes down here, we say if the type of math is a plus. Well, it's not, it's an equal sign. Is it a minus? No. Times? No. Divide? No. Well, if it's anything else, this will run. So what happens is we come back up here to start, and we clear out the console, and we restart the whole thing. And system environment.exit is kind of difficult to explain, but I'll do my best here. Essentially, you have to remember that programming is running line by line. That's the basics of it. So when we call this, right? We call answer equals math, AB type of math. That immediately jumps down to this line, and then to this line, and it goes on through all this. When we get down to start, it jumps back up to start, and it runs through start. But when it finishes running through start, it jumps back down here again. Because remember, math, the first execution of the math function never finished running. We got to here, but we never finished running. We have to get all the way down to here to finish running. So when it's done running math the second time, it's going to jump back here and finish the first instance of math, which is going to mess everything up, so we have to cancel that from happening by doing environment.exit0. Very simple. So you can see now that we can enter anything we want and have error handling there. Now obviously this error handling isn't perfect, because some of you might have picked up on already, we're only checking for the character, we're not checking for the floats to make sure they're floats. I'll show you what happens actually if we don't type in a float. Say we type just hello for the first variable. Well, it's going to crash, all right? Because it's trying to parse it into an input, into a float, and you can't just turn hello into a float just through the parse method. So that's more on the error handling side of things. We'll look at that a little bit more sometime later. But for now, what we want to do is we want to come down here. We're going to say console.writeLine. I'm going to start with a new line here, and then we're going to write press Y, just like that, to run again. All right. Now, this is in order to get us to run again. So, and again, we still have input. We can just say input for this. Input equals console.readLine, and we'll say if input equals just y, or input equals lowercase y. Now what's this? What's this pipe here? Well, the pipe, two pipes means or. So an if statement, remember, is if this condition is true, then run this code. What this is saying is if this condition is true, or if this condition is true, run this code. And there's a similar thing, which is and. Two ampersand signs is and. So if this condition is true and this condition is true, then run this code. We're using or here, so this means someone can type an uppercase or a lowercase y. Fairly simple, right? And all we want to do is restart the program if this is the case. So we can actually just copy what we have down here and use that. Very, very simple. And let's go ahead and run that and see what happens. So we'll enter the first variable, we'll say 10 times, and you'll see it gives us our output of 100 and then asks if we want to run again. So let's run again, and we're going to do it again, right? 0.5, 0.5, and plus gives us a 1, y to run it again. Pretty simple. We now have a much better user experience, it's much more user friendly, and it's an actual calculator rather than just a math function. So we've covered all that I want to talk about for user input for today. We'll come back to it later, but for now, that's it. We're now going to talk about something called comments. So come up here, way to the top between the using statements and the namespace, and make a little gap there, and type / space. Now, you can see that this has turned green. / signifies the start of a single line comment. This is a comment. What is that? Now, a comment is text or some sort of characters in your program that the computer will ignore. So for example, if I come down here and I just type this is a comment, right? That's going to break the whole program, because that's not valid code, and that's not even where valid code goes. This is outside of the namespace, let alone the class, let alone a function. This is going to break everything. So if I want to say this namespace is great, I can't do that here. I have to turn it into a comment so that the computer will ignore it. All right? That is a single line comment. They are very, very useful. I don't expect you to start using them very much off the bat, but you will get used to them eventually, and they will save you a lot of headaches in the future. So that's a single line comment. We'll also look at a multi-line comment, which looks like this. /* is the start, and */ is the end. And anything written on any of these lines will be a comment, right? So that you don't have to just do // Just an easier way to handle all that. So let's put some comments into our code here. We're going to start up here. Prepares the console and welcomes the user. That's what that does. Very simple. And we know that this is referring to all of this because of the spaces and because of the fact that there's another comment starting here, which says asks the user for a variable, then stores it. Again, be descriptive in what's happening. We ask the user for a variable, and then we store that variable in float A. Pretty simple. And we can just copy that down here. And then down here we can say asks the user for the type of math and stores it. Just like that. We don't really need a comment for float answer. It's a descriptive variable name, and it's a very simple variable. Anyone reading our code should be able to tell what this is doing. But we are going to come down here and we're going to say performs the math and outputs the results to console, and asks the user if they would like to run the program again. So these comments, primarily, they're for people to understand your code. So they can help you out a lot, but don't forget they can also help other people. If you're sending your code to someone else for some help, it's really good to have comments that tells the person what this does. Because if they're not the one that wrote it, they might not understand what exactly you're trying to do here. And so it's good to have in human terms what's happening. And that's something you can do with comments. And you can see if we run our program, none of this is going to be picked up on by the program. It's all just ignored and the program runs fine. That's going to do it for episode 4 of Sneaky Programming. Really hope you enjoyed. As always, if you have any questions or any comments, leave it in the comment section down below. And have a great day, everyone. Bye.